The dust kicked up by 20 horses settled slowly in the afternoon heat, revealing a sight that made Clara Mitchell's heart stop cold. There, in the center of Willow Creek's main street, stood a man she'd never thought she'd see again. His hands were bound behind his back, his dark hair hung loose around his shoulders, and his clothes were torn and bloodied. But it was his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness that confirmed her worst fears. It was James Whitehawk, the man she'd loved, the man she'd lost, the man everyone in this town called Savage. Step right up, folks. Sheriff Porter called out to the growing crowd. Got ourselves a real prize here. This here's the half-breed that's been terrorizing settlements up north. 27 confirmed raids, they say. The army's paying good money for him, dead or alive. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched, her shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 years. 3 long years since she'd last seen James, since the night he'd disappeared without a word, leaving only a hastily scrawled note that had broken her heart. Asterisk, I'm not the man you think I am. You deserve better. Forget me, asterisk. Now she understood why he'd left. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with curiosity and hatred. Mrs. Henderson from the general store spat in the dirt near James's feet. Look at him, she hissed, acting all proud even now. That's Indian blood for you, no shame, no remorse. James kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his jaw set in that stubborn line Clara remembered so well. But she could see the pain there, the way his shoulders sagged just slightly under the weight of their stares and whispers. He looked older, harder, marked by whatever he'd endured in the years since he'd left her. What's the bounty, Sheriff? Called out Tom Bradley, the town's blacksmith. His meaty hands were already reaching for the gun at his hip. $500, Porter replied with a grin. Of course, that's only if we bring him in breathing. Dead might be easier to manage. The crowd murmured its approval, but Clara felt sick to her stomach. She pushed through the press of bodies, her heart hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. Not to James. Not to the man who had once picked wildflowers for her just because he liked the way they looked in her hair. Wait. She called out, her voice cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. The crowd turned to look at her, surprise written on their faces. Clara Mitchell was known as the quiet schoolteacher, the spinster who kept to herself and minded her own business. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but she was causing one now. Don't hurt him, she said. Stepping into the circle that had formed around James, for the first time since his capture, he looked at her directly. The shock in his eyes nearly undid her, but she forced herself to stand tall. I'll buy him. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Porter blinked at her as if she'd just spoken in a foreign tongue. Excuse me, Miss Mitchell. You heard me. Clara's voice was steady now, strengthened by a resolve she didn't know she possessed. I'll pay the $500. I'll buy him from you, Clara. No, James started to speak, but Porter cut him off with a sharp gesture. That's not how it works. Ma'am, the sheriff said, though his eyes had taken on a calculating gleam. This here's a wanted man, a dangerous outlaw. He's bound for the territorial prison, not the slave market. Everything has a price. Sheriff Porter. Clara reached into her reticule and pulled out a leather pouch, her life savings. Money she'd been carefully setting aside for years with dreams of maybe traveling back east someday. I have $600 right here. Cash money. The crowd stirred restlessly. $600 was more than most of them saw in 2 years. It was certainly more than Porter made in his position as sheriff. Miss Mitchell, Dr. Henley, town's physician, stepped forward with concern etched on his weathered face. You don't understand what you're proposing. This man is accused of terrible crimes. Raids, murders, accusations, Clara said firmly. Has he been tried? Has he been found guilty by a jury of his peers? Well, no, but then he's innocent until proven otherwise. She looked directly at James again, trying to pour all the love and faith she'd carried for him these past 3 years into that single glance. Call him savage all you want. I see a man worth saving. James closed his eyes as if her words caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Clara, he whispered, You don't know what I've done, what I've become. I know who you are, she replied softly. And I know who you were. That man is still in there, James Whitehawk. I'd stake my life on it. Sheriff Porter cleared his throat loudly. Even if I was inclined to accept such an unusual arrangement, he said slowly, what exactly would you do with him? You can't just set a dangerous criminal free. Clara had been thinking furiously, and now she had her answer. He'd work for me. On my property. I have 20 acres outside town that need clearing and cultivation. He'd be my responsibility, my employee, you might say. If he commits any crime at all, you can take him, and I forfeit the money. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all she had. The crowd was murmuring among themselves now, some arguing for taking her money, others insisting that justice demanded blood. Porter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. $600 would solve a lot of problems for him. His wife had been after him for months about fixing up their house, and winter was coming on. Besides, if the half-breed did anything stupid, he could always arrest him again and keep the money. I'd need guarantees, he said finally. Legal documents. And he'd be your responsibility 24 hours a day. One toe out of line, ... agreed, Clara said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. Clara, don't do this. James's voice was rough with emotion. You don't understand. The things they say I did, some of them are true. I'm not the man you remember. She turned to face him fully then, ignoring the curious stares of the crowd. Then show me who you are now, she said simply. Show me who you've become. The next hour passed in a blur of hastily drawn contracts and exchanged money. Dr. Henley and Pastor Williams both tried to talk Clara out of her decision, but she remained firm. By the time the sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, James Whitehawk was legally bound to work for Clara Mitchell for a period of no less than 2 years, or until his debt was considered paid. As the crowd dispersed and Sheriff Porter headed off to count his unexpected windfall, Clara found herself alone with James for the first time in 3 years. His hands had been unbound, but he still stood stiffly, as if ready to bolt at any moment. Why? He asked simply. Clara looked at him. He was thinner than she remembered, marked by hard living and harder choices. There were new scars on his hands and arms and lines around his eyes that spoke of pain and sleepless nights. But underneath it all, she could still see the man who had courted her so gently, who had read poetry to her under the cottonwoods by the creek. Because I love you, she said. I never stopped loving you. James flinched as if she'd struck him. You shouldn't, Clara. If you knew, then tell me. She reached for his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he let her take it. His skin was rough and warm, familiar yet strange. Tell me everything. Tell me why you left. Tell me what you've done. Tell me who you've become. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My mother died that winter after we started courting, he said. Consumption. On her deathbed, she told me the truth about my father, about why she'd never married, why we'd always lived on the edge of town, why people looked at me the way they did. Clara waited, her heart aching for the pain she could hear in his voice. My father was Colonel Marcus Steele, James continued. The same Colonel Steele who led the massacre at Bear Creek 7 years ago. The same man who ordered the deaths of over 200 Cheyenne, including children and old people who had come in under a flag of truce. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Everyone knew about Bear Creek, about the atrocity that had shocked even hardened frontier veterans. It had been the catalyst for years of increased raids and violence. When my mother told me, I felt like my whole world had cracked apart. Half of me was the blood of the man who had murdered innocent people. The other half was the blood of those same people he'd killed. James's grip on her hand tightened. I couldn't stay here, Clara. I couldn't look at you and pretend to be the man you thought I was. So you left, Clara said softly. I went north, to the reservation. I thought maybe I could find some peace there, some understanding of who I was supposed to be. His laugh was bitter. Instead, I found my mother's people dying slowly of disease and starvation, children begging for food, Old warriors reduced to begging for government handouts. Clara could see where this story was leading, and her heart clenched with dread. I started taking food from supply wagons, James continued. Just a little at first. Flour, beans, salt pork, things the government promised but never delivered. Then it became medicine when the fever came. Then weapons when the young men decided they'd rather die fighting than starve slowly. James nodded. 7 in total, not 27 like they said. And no one died, Clara. I made sure of that. We took supplies, horses, weapons, but we never killed anyone. Not once. Then why? Because 3 weeks ago, someone wearing war paint and feathers hit a settlement near Fort Collins. They killed a family husband, wife, 2 children, left them scalped and mutilated. James's voice broke slightly. They found my horse's tracks near the scene. My horse that had been stolen from me the week before. The pieces clicked into place in Clara's mind. Someone set you up. Colonel Steele, James said grimly. My loving father. Seems he's been tracking me for months, waiting for the right opportunity. He wants me dead, Clara. Wants to erase the evidence of what he did to my mother, what he's been doing to the tribes. Clara felt a cold fury settle in her chest. He killed that family himself, probably. Or had his men do it. Makes no difference. Everyone believes it was Mitha, savage half-breed, son of a white soldier and an Indian woman. It's the perfect story. James gently pulled his hand free from hers. And that's why you have to let me go tonight. Before he comes looking and finds you involved with. Me, no. The word came out harder than Clara intended. No, I won't let you run again. I won't let them win. Clara, listen to me. It's James Whitehawk. She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. 3 years ago, you left me because you thought you weren't good enough. Because you thought your blood made you less than human. But you were wrong then, and you're wrong now. I've killed people. Clara, maybe not in those raids, but I've killed. In self-defense, in anger, but I've taken lives. So has my brother. So has Sheriff Porter. So has every man on this frontier worth the name. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. Feeling the roughness of several days' worth of beard, the difference is, it haunts you. It breaks your heart. That's not the mark of a savage. James, that's the mark of a good man forced into impossible choices. Tears were running down his cheeks now, cutting tracks through the dust and grime. I'm tired, Clara. I'm so damned tired of running, of fighting, of trying to figure out where I belong in this world. Then stop running, she whispered. Stay here. With me? Let me help you carry this burden. If I stay, people will die. Steele won't stop until I'm dead. And he'll go through anyone who gets in his way. Clara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When she spoke again, her voice was calm and determined. Then we make sure he can't hurt anyone, she said. We find proof of what he's done. We expose him for the murderer he is. James stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Clara, he's a colonel in the U.S. Army. He has connections, resources, men who follow his orders without question. What do we have? We have the truth, Clara said simply, and we have each other. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, Clara could hear the sounds of evening settling over Willow Creek mothers calling children in for supper. The lowing of cattle being brought in for the night, the gentle creak of windmills turning in the evening breeze. Come home with me, she said. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow. James looked at her for a long moment. Clara could see the battle being fought behind his eyes. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Clara's house sat on a small rise, about a mile outside town. Simple but well-built structure, with a garden plot and a small barn. As they walked up the path together, Clara found herself nervous in a way she hadn't expected. She'd dreamed of having James here in her home. But never under circumstances like these. You've made improvements, James observed. And Clara was grateful for the neutral topic. The school board gave me a raise last year, she said. I was able to add the second bedroom and expand the garden. Inside, the house was cozy and feminine, with calico curtains at the windows and books scattered on every available surface. Clara bustled around lighting lamps and stoking the fire, acutely aware of James standing awkwardly in the center of her parlor. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I have some stew left from yesterday and I could make biscuits." "Clara." His voice stopped her nervous chatter. "We need to talk about what happens now." She turned to face him. Noting how the lamplight softened the harsh lines that 3 years of hard living had carved into his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean the practical things. The legal contract says, I work for you, but what does that actually mean? What do you need me to do?" Clara realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. In her desperation to save him, she'd made promises she wasn't sure how to keep. "I suppose," she said slowly, "you could help with the heavy work around here. The wood needs to be cut and split for winter. The barn roof needs repair. I've been wanting to clear more land for a larger garden." James nodded. "That I can do. And Clara, I want you to know that I'll work hard. I'll earn every penny of what you've paid for me." "You don't have to earn anything," Clara said softly. "I didn't buy you, James. I saved you. There's a difference, is there?" His smile was sad. "I'm bound to you now, whether I want to be or not." That sounds an awful lot like ownership to me. The words stung because they held a grain of truth. In her desperate love, had she simply traded one form of captivity for another? "The contract is for 2 years," she said quietly. "After that, you're free to go wherever you want. I won't try to stop you, and if I wanted to leave tomorrow—" Clara's heart clenched, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then you could go. I wouldn't have you held against your will." James studied her face for a long moment. "You mean that?" "I mean it." Something shifted in his expression then. It's a subtle relaxation of the tension he'd been carrying. "In that case," he said, "I think I'd like some of that stew." They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Clara showed James to the small second bedroom, apologizing for its sparse furnishings. "It's perfect," he assured her. "More comfortable than anywhere I've slept in months." As she turned to leave him for the night, he caught her hand. "Clara," he said quietly, "thank you for believing in me, for seeing something worth saving." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Get some rest, James. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to clear your name." But as Clara lay in her own bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of her house settling around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Colonel Steele wouldn't give up easily, and there were too many people in Willow Creek who would be happy to see James White Hawk hang. Still, for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. The man she loved was sleeping just 20 feet away, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The sound of horses approaching fast woke Clara before dawn. She threw on her robe and rushed to the window, her heart sinking as she saw the group of riders in the gray morning light. At their head rode a tall man in an officer's uniform, his silver hair gleaming beneath his hat. Colonel Steele had come calling. Clara quickly dressed and hurried to James's room, but it was empty. Panic flared in her chest until she heard voices from outside. Through the kitchen window, she could see James standing in her yard, facing down 6 mounted soldiers. He was unarmed, his hands held loosely at his sides, but his posture was proud and unafraid. Clara grabbed her father's old rifle from above the fireplace and stepped out onto her porch. "Good morning." "Colonel," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the still air, "you're on my property." Steele turned his pale eyes toward her, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. This was a man who had ordered the deaths of women and children without flinching. "Miss Mitchell," he said with false courtesy, "I've come for my property." "I'm not aware of any property of yours on my land," Clara replied evenly. "That half-breed savage belongs to me," Steele said, his voice hardening. "He's my responsibility, my burden to bear." "He's my employee," Clara said firmly. "I have legal documentation to prove it." "Legal documentation can be amended," Steele said with a cold smile, "especially when it concerns the safety of decent folk." James stepped forward slightly. "Leave her out of this, Steele. This is between you and me, is it?" The colonel's attention shifted back to James, and Clara saw something like hatred flicker in his eyes. "You've been quite the disappointment, boy. I had hoped you'd have the sense to simply disappear after I gave you that convenient excuse to run. Instead, you had to go and get yourself captured. So you admit it," Clara called out. "You framed him for those murders." Steele's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Prove it, schoolteacher. Prove that a decorated officer of the United States Army would soil his hands with the blood of settlers, the same way you soiled your hands at Bear Creek." James's voice was deadly quiet. The change in Steele was immediate and frightening. His face flushed dark red, and his hand moved to his sidearm. "You dare, I dare," James said, stepping closer to the mounted men. "I dare because I know what you are. A coward who kills women and children and calls it glory. A man who rapes Indian women and then abandons their children to live as outcasts." Sergeant Morrison Steele barked to one of his men, "Arrest this savage for threatening an officer." But Morrison hesitated, his eyes darting between his colonel and the man on the ground. "Sir, he didn't actually threaten. Are you questioning my orders, Sergeant?" "No, sir, but the lady has legal papers." Steele's gun was in his hand before anyone could react. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. Clara screamed as James staggered backward, blood blooming across his shirt. "James." She started to run toward him, but he held up his hand, staying upright through sheer force of will. "I'm all right," he gasped, though Clara could see he was anything but. "Just a graze." Steele holstered his weapon with casual indifference. "Resisting arrest?" he said to his men. "You all saw it." The savage was reaching for a weapon, but Clara noticed that two of the soldiers were looking uncomfortable, their eyes avoiding their commander's gaze. Perhaps not all of them were willing to be party to cold-blooded murder. "You shot an unarmed man," Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. "In front of witnesses, I shot a dangerous criminal who was threatening the life of an army officer," Steele replied smoothly. "Any court in the territory would consider it justified." Clara looked at the faces of the soldiers, seeing doubt in some, fear in others. These men might be willing to follow orders, but she suspected they drew the line at outright murder, especially in front of a white woman who could testify against them. An idea began to form in her mind, a desperate idea, but perhaps their only chance. "Colonel Steele," she said loudly, making sure her voice carried to all the soldiers. "Are you here as an officer of the law or as a father?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "I'm asking if you're here in your official capacity, or if this is personal business between you and your son." The word son hung in the air like a gunshot. Clara saw several of the soldiers exchange glances, and she knew her gamble had paid off. They hadn't known about Steele's relationship to James. "Careful, schoolteacher," Steele said, his voice dangerously low. "You're treading on thin ice." "Am I?" Clara took a step closer, still holding her rifle. "Because it seems to me that a man who abandons his child might have reasons for wanting that child dead. Reasons that have nothing to do with justice." "Sergeant Morrison." One of the younger soldiers said quietly, "What's she talking about?" Morrison's weathered face was troubled. "I don't know. Private. But I think we need to hear this out." Clara felt a surge of hope. If she could get the soldiers questioning their commander, maybe she could save James's life. "Tell them, Colonel," she said boldly. "Tell them how James Whitehawk is your son. Tell them how you raped his mother and left her to raise a half-breed child alone. Tell them why you really want him dead." Steele's face had gone white with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Clara looked directly at Sergeant Morrison. "Ask him why he's been tracking James for months. Ask him why he really killed that family near Fort Collins and left James's horse tracks at the scene. That's enough." Steele roared, drawing his gun again. "I'll kill you both here and now." But as he raised his weapon, Sergeant Morrison's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Colonel," Morrison said firmly, "I think we need to discuss this situation. Take your hands off me, Sergeant." "Not until you put the gun down, sir." Morrison's voice was respectful, but implacable. "Something's not right here, and these are serious accusations." For a moment, Clara thought Steele might try to shoot his way out of the situation, but he was outnumbered, and even his own men were looking at him with suspicion now. Slowly, he holstered his weapon. "This isn't over," he said, his pale eyes promising violence. "I'll be back with proper warrants and more men." "You do that, Colonel?" Clara said steadily. "And when you do, we'll be ready for you." As the soldiers rode away, Clara rushed to James's side. The bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. She helped him into the house and cleaned the wound while he gritted his teeth against the pain. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said as she bandaged his ribs. "Probably both," Clara admitted. "But I bought us some time. Morrison seems like a decent man, and he'll ask questions. If we're lucky, he'll start investigating Steele's story. And if we're unlucky, Steele comes back with 50 men and burns this place to the ground with us in it." Clara finished tying off the bandage and sat back on her heels. "Then we'd better make sure we're not here when that happens." James looked at her with surprise. "You want to run?" "I want to fight," Clara corrected. "But not from here. We need allies, James. We need people who will believe our story and help us prove it." "Who?" "Everyone in this territory thinks I'm a murdering savage." Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Not everyone," she said. "There's someone I think might help us. Someone who has as much reason to hate Colonel Steele as we do." "Who?" "Judge William Harrison," Clara said. "The territorial judge. His son was killed at Bear Creek." James stared at her. "You think he'll help us?" "I think he wants the truth about what happened there," Clara said. "And I think he might be willing to listen to the son of the man responsible." It was a long shot, Clara knew, but it was the only chance they had. Within the hour, she had packed supplies and saddled her horse. James was pale from blood loss, but insisted he could ride. As they prepared to leave, Clara took one last look at her little house. She had built a life here, carved out a small piece of happiness in this harsh frontier world. Now she was abandoning it all for a man who might not love her the way she loved him. But as James helped her up onto her horse, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary, Clara knew she was making the right choice. Some things were worth more than security. Some people were worth any sacrifice. "Ready?" James asked, settling carefully into his own saddle. Clara nodded, turning her horse toward the road that led to Denver and whatever fate awaited them there. "Ready?" she said, as they rode out into the morning sun. Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: hope. They were together again, and whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them side by side. It was enough. For now, it was enough behind them. The morning mist rose from Willow Creek, and the little town went about its business. Unaware that two hearts had just set out to change their world forever, the road to Denver was long and dangerous, fraught with the possibility of pursuit and the certain knowledge that Colonel Steele would not give up easily. But Clara Mitchell had made her choice, and she would see it through to the end. After all, she had always known that love was worth fighting for. Now she was going to prove it.